Hello, 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 everybody. I am adjusting my microphone on the fly, but look at that. I'm so sly. I got it done and still hosted the introduction to the show. So, you know what time it is. It is Friday afternoon here in Southern California. It is Friday evening over there on the East Coast of the United States. It is late Friday over in Europe. It might even be Saturday wherever you are in the world, but my camera is doing weird things. But no matter where you are, it is time for Cinema Crusaders, that show where we take a look at older movies, break them down, reintroduce them to new audiences, and hopefully you will go back and check these movies out because no matter whether they are good movies or bad movies, there's always something to take out of them. We find cool, interesting things to talk about, and it's worth looking back at the history of cinema and what has come before in anticipation of what can come next. So, but before we get into this week's movie, which is Kelly's Heroes from 1970, starring a cavalcade of stars, which we will go into because there are so many, I need to introduce those gentlemen who make this show possible. I'm talking about none other than my fellow Cinema Crusaders. So, two of our Crusaders are not here at the moment. First off, Lance Lucero of Warehouse 9 Pro is off gallivanting around the country and doing fun things. So we wish him the best. Also, Jeff Bracey is not here at the moment. We are hopeful he might be able to show up, but if he's not, we know that he is off doing something and we wish him all the best and we will see him again soon. But here today to talk about this film, and this is also his pick, we are going a little bit out of order because Lance had to leave. So I will announce now that the movie Lance picked was Thief, getting there from Real Men through James Belushi. And then Steve picked this movie, Kelly's Heroes. So I'm going to introduce him right now. You all know him as the man who is the owner of a Beagle, but he is also a writer, a role player, an educator, and an all-around aficionado, look at that word, of comics. Yes, it is Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Yeah, we need to go and send out more negative waves. More positive waves out there. We have to imagine that the bridges. We have to imagine Jeff is here, so he will be here.
So say something righteous.
So. Yes. Very much so. Yeah, this is one of those movies. Actually, I got here by way of Tom Signorelli, who was also in Thief. So hopefully, we'll be seeing more of him next week. He really wasn't that big of a factor in this movie, but he featured in it, and this is one of my old favorites. So. It's kind of nice to get back to this. I did see Kelly's Heroes way back in the day. It was one of those I really did. It was one of my first real fun war movie outings. But it wasn't really one that I kind of understood in the way that I do now. Because now looking at this, it's like half of it is the incompetence of the Allied forces, and half of it is just these guys deciding, yeah, we're going to find ways to capitalize on the stupidity of everyone around us, and to the tune of $16 million.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. This movie is one of my all-time favorites. I got introduced by my mom a long time ago, and I watch it on a semi-regular basis. I did watch it again for this show, but honestly, I have watched it so many times that I pretty much have it memorized. But I love the show, and there are those different layers to it, and we could get into that if we want. We'll see where we get because there are a lot of acting performances to talk about. But what is interesting, you brought up 16 million, so let's get into the plot for a minute. Basically, what we have is we have a platoon of soldiers who are at the front. They're in France. Following the landing at Normandy and D-Day, and they're like the tip of the spear. They've got Patton on their right. They've got the British on their left. They're stuck in there, and they're fighting all the time. And then also every time that they get someplace close to capturing a city, they get pulled back, and the brass roll in and get to celebrate and get the girls and all the other stuff. So they're upset about that, and they end up, same thing happens, and they're looking for something to do. Meanwhile, Kelly, played by Clint Eastwood, had captured a German officer on the orders of the sergeant, Big Joe, played by Telly Savalas. And they originally had him capture him because they wanted to use a German, as a tour guide because they're looking for a hotel, and some women and some booze, to party. And Kelly comes back with an intelligence officer, and long story short, they find out that this intelligence officer was transporting documents detailing a huge shipment of gold being stored in a bank in some place called Clermont, excuse me, we have to say it correct, in France. Now, what's interesting is I did my homework. I checked. So in the movie, there's $16 million worth of gold in this bank. Now, I'm assuming that this is 1944 based on where they are and everything. So at that time, with the price of gold, just Steve, take a guess how much that gold would be worth in today's dollars.
Oh, I imagine it would be like hundreds of millions, if not billions.
$1,030,000,000.
Sounds about right.
That's a lot of money. I think, if I was in a war and someone told me you have a chance to go and get share of $1 billion, I'd be like, yep, I will go and fight for that. So
nobody wants to fight for any reasonable reason. Like they don't care about the Nazis. They don't care about like the cause or anything like that.
Yeah.
They just care about, are we having fun right now? Are we not getting shot at? And oh yeah, here's some money. Let's go and do that, because they're clearly not being paid well either.
Yeah. So yeah, they're being paid $50 a month. So the whole point of this movie is that Kelly puts together this heist, and they're going to break through the enemy lines because it's 30 miles behind enemy lines, rob this bank that's behind enemy lines, which is like the perfect crime, get away. I don't know what they're going to do with the gold. I'm presuming they're going to stash it somewhere until the war is over, and whoever survives gets a share, and do this thing. And along the way, there's a host of characters. So there's the logistics guy played by Don Rickles. There's God, I can't even remember his name now. The artillery commander, who is just complete incompetent. Carol O'Connor plays the general officer who's in charge of their division. And then you've got, like I said, you've got Telly Savalas in there. You've got Harry Dean Stanton playing a guy named Willard, who's fantastic, and he's got his counterpart named Cowboy. So we're going to get into all those. And Donald Sutherland playing a tank commander called Oddball, and we will talk about him as well. One of my favorite characters in the movies of all time. He's easily top 5, I would say. But they eventually get to Clermont, and they're getting ready to get into the bank, and they brought some tanks with them, and they're either dead or broken down. And there's one Tiger tank left. They pulled off this great plan. They did everything, but shit happened. One of their tanks, their last tank broke, and there's a Tiger tank, and they can't get it. And one of the greatest scenes of the movie, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, and Clint Eastwood walk out Western style to showdown with the Panzer, and let this one surviving German sergeant know what exactly he is guarding. They said, all you have to do is turn that turret around and blow a door in that hole for your share of $16 million, or however many Deutschmarks it is. And the next scene we have is the door blowing open, which says,
I think they said it was like 64 million marks.
Yeah. It says the German is like, yeah, I don't really want to be here and die fighting either. I'll take my share of the money and go, So
the Fuhrer didn't exactly inspire a whole lot of loyalty in his men, it must be said.
Yeah. And of course, so by the end, they're all racing to get out of the city with the gold before the general shows up, because the last thing they want is for the Allies to show up. Then they have to surrender the gold, And so that's the last part of the movie, is them pulling out just as Carol O'Connor comes in. And, and the people that didn't get there in time are stuck with no share of the gold. And so they've successfully pulled off this heist. Great movie. It's a combination of, there are some comedic parts, some great war stuff, action stuff. And there's
a satire, I would say.
Yeah. There's some of that going on. And it's just a fun movie. It's a very fun movie. But there are some deeper moments as well, which we might get into talking about. So there's a couple moments, a couple people die along the way. So this is not an OP group, they're competent, but they lose some people. So with that, I think we have to start with the cast, because there are just so many great performances. Some people who are already established performers, some people who go on to be established, but I think we have to start with them. So I'm going to This is your movie, Steve. I'm going to pass it on to you. Who do you want to talk about first?
I'm going to start off with with Kelly, because I kind of feel like everything kind of revolves around him. He is the main hero. He's the one who, brings the plan together, who brings the crew together. He's the one who takes charge over Joe when Joe is the only like the last holdout, because everybody else wants to go in and get the money right now. And a lot of it is you find out a little bit about him, that he was basically an officer who had taken that one area, and then only to find out that they had taken the wrong place because he had been given bad information. And of course, he ends up taking the blame for it, and ends up getting knocked down a couple pegs to Master Sergeant. I think before he might have been a lieutenant or even a captain.
He's actually a private in the movie. So
okay,
they
knocked him down. They knocked him. No, I thought he was Master Sergeant.
No, he's a buck private. Telly Savalas is a Master Sergeant. So
okay, yeah, but well, yeah. So he was an officer who got knocked down because of this, and yet he still is a guy who thinks like an officer in the best way. He's the guy making all the plans. He's the guy that thinks about the tactics and all of that. And I will also say the one thing about this movie, I think we want to kind of think a little bit about it. It's not just a war movie. This is a heist. So you have it's a little bit of heist movie and a little bit of war movie. So you have a commander who is not only a good tactician, who's good at bringing all these crazy people together and keeping them on task. He's also the man with the plan, thinking about how to steal the money and everything that comes into. So he has to think about what could go wrong in the heist. Who could catch us? How could they catch us? What do we come off with before somebody does catch us? What do we do about that? How do you react when something goes wrong? And you see Kelly, come into his own with all of that. He's able to bring all this together. And in fact, he's clearly the more competent than any of the top brass, because those people are clueless. They have no idea what they're doing. And even by the time that they're rolling off with the gold, nobody knows what he's actually did. So, this is definitely, but at the same time, I also think he's very much a straight man to all of the craziness that's going on about him. Because you guys like Oddball, you got guys like Crap Game, people that are just, completely ridiculous off the wall characters. And Kelly is very much, So. and with Kelly, it's just, he's Clint Eastwood, he's the guy in charge. He's the guy doing stuff. And while all these crazy people are doing whatever they're doing. So he really works, I think, in this film.
Absolutely. And it's Clint Eastwood playing Clint Eastwood. It's like, he's not stretching here at all. Not that he's not able to do that, especially later in his career, but here he's just playing pure Clint Eastwood. If you had taken put a poncho on him and a cowboy hat, he would have been the man with no name. So it's like,
they even take advantage of that with that one moment where they were about to have the Mexican standoff. It looked almost like the Wild Bunch with those three guys like walking down the street, towards the tank, and with a Western theme in the background. Like, they knew exactly who they cast and why they cast it. They wanted that persona.
And you're looking for it works to go across, So it's funny.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's also funny mentioning Kelly that, like you said, he's not an officer anymore, but he's the most competent officer in the entire movie, outside of the German officers. So the Carroll O'Connor as a German officer is a buffoon. He is like the stereotypical brash American. And we could talk about, we'll see if we get to him. His general staff is equally perplexed. There are a few inconsistencies in this movie, military-wise, but nothing, huge to write out about. But yeah, they're not very good at what they do. And then the commanding officer of this platoon. Now, first of all, I think they got it wrong. He must be the commanding officer of the company, and this platoon is in his company because he's a captain, and captains don't command platoons, but that's neither here nor there. Their captain is the nephew of the general officer, and he is, not only is he a buffoon, he's an idiot. He doesn't care about what he's doing there, and he's a looter. So even if he caught them, he has no business trying to catch them and stop them from stealing the gold, because the first time we see him, he's stealing a sailboat and taking it back to Paris. So,
they're all there after themselves, taking whatever they can from the locals, and they're all eating it up because hey, they're free of the Nazis. Here, go ahead, take our bank, take our gold, take our boats.
Yeah, and it's a very different take on World War II, and I say that because up to this point, most of the World War II movies you had were very serious. You had to paint all of the Americans as the hero was going to jump on the grenade, but by this point in 1970, I guess we were far enough away from World War II that we could start making fun of it. And it's funny because right after this, Patton comes out, so we went another different look at the war, but from a slightly different perspective, because George C. Scott was a devout pacifist, and he's playing Patton. So it was interesting he signed on for that. But it was funny because the further we got away from that, the actual war, the war movies about World War II started to change. So you could see that in this one. Now, since you brought up Kelly, I've got to go with his counterpart. So Kelly is the true platoon leader of this platoon. He is the lieutenant. Even though he has to defer to this other character because he doesn't have the rank technically, which is Telly Savalas, Master Sergeant. He's a platoon sergeant of the platoon, Big Joe. That's the name of his character. And Telly Savalas is fantastic in this movie. He really is. He plays it straight, but the way he is a slick mover and how he doesn't give a crap, he's so used to the war. Like he's just sitting there waiting for the shell to drop. It's like, if I die, I die. If not, I'll just keep going. Like all of them are so battle hardened at this point. And Telly Savalas is fantastic. I will tell you, if I was asking for the ideal platoon sergeant, it would probably be a version of Big Joe. He's amazing. And he's always looking for his troops. So, I mean, even though he's the one who's against Kelly's plan, the reason he's against it is because he's like, look, we got to get to Berlin. These guys only have so much luck. Why are we going to push their luck doing this? And they're like, well, if I'm going to buy it, at least I'm buying it, trying to get some money, So, but yeah, he does an amazing performance in this movie. And it's funny because we were talking before we came on air. You contrast this performance with several of the performers in this movie were also in The Dirty Dozen. And he plays, God, I can't remember that name, but the name of the character, but he's completely repulsive in The Dirty Dozen. A racist and everything else, and he ends up getting killed. And you compare it to this character, they're night and day. You would have a hard time believing they're the same actor, in fact. So just really, really talented actor and a fun character to watch. The way his interactions with everybody, his interactions with Clint Eastwood, his interactions with Don Rickles, his interactions with Donald Sutherland, he's great playing off everybody else. A very, very good actor. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you can definitely see that he has a lot of bluster, and he's the one who's kind of yelling at people. He's doing the Arlie Ermy thing, really trying to keep everybody in line and all that stuff. And he does a good job of it. But you see underneath all that he actually does care about the troops under his command. Like he gives crap game shit throughout the entire movie, and then you have that really cool scene towards the end, where it's like, yeah, you're not too bad. Like you can definitely kind of feel like there's a genuine friendship at the end with him and Crap Game by the end. Like, so it's definitely that, he gives people crap, but it's always so that they can do better and be better soldiers and, and deliver the most that they can give so they can get out in one piece. He's trying to keep everybody alive, So yeah, he's hard on people, but it's in a drill sergeant way.
He's like most platoon sergeants or first sergeants that I ever met, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it even more once I was in the Army because I didn't know what the archetype was. And then I saw it and I was like, yeah, it's pretty true to form. So it was good. Another character for you.
I'm going to give you oddball because I know you want to talk about him. I guess we'll talk a little bit about Carol O'Connor as the general. It seems like since you brought up Patton, I just got the feeling like they were trying to make fun of the Patton persona. And kind of show him underneath all that, like he's just blustering his way through the entire East, and he doesn't know what he's doing. Like he has no clue what he's doing. He's behind everybody. He's funny though, in the way that I have a communications officer who can't communicate. What's the point of having a communications officer who can't communicate anything? Do you know anything? I just thought that was absolutely hilarious, and it's especially funny because he doesn't really know anything either. He's the last to know anything, and so because there's no coordination whatsoever with anybody, and nobody knows what they're doing, and nobody's like keeping any communications that's clear with each other. What ends up happening is that he's the last to know anything, and he goes writing out once everybody else has already done the hard work, take the credit for it, when he's done absolutely nothing. Like absolutely nothing. The whole thing was an illegal operation, and he's just like, okay, I'll go ahead and let it slide because it makes us look good. Yeah, because Kelly is the guy doing all the work, because he's the guy who's the real officer in the whole group, and you're kind of following along, because you want a piece of it. So yeah, it's a funny character, but I imagine that there were probably office staff officers like that.
Oh yeah, and I will say that for all of you who don't know who Carroll O'Connor was, his most famous role, he played Archie Bunker. So
in The Heat of the Night.
Yep. But he's the stereotype of an American general. I mean, he's blustery, he's loud. He tells someone to turn down the radio because the game is on, because he wants to hear the war, or he's always referred to it in football terms. It's like everything. If you could come up with the stereotype of an American and then an American general officer and put it all into one person, it's this character, and he's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, I think he did a good job. I think that, like, the stuff with the medals and everything, I think you're right that he's imitating Bradley, or not Bradley. Bradley was very good officer, but Patton, Patton was competent, but Patton was also obsessed with other things. If we ever get to Patton, we could talk about that. So,
we do. I love that one.
I do too, and I'm a big fan of Patton as a military officer, but he had a lot of foibles as well. Yeah. So okay, now I do have to thank you for saving this read. I have to get to, like I said, one of my favorite characters of all time, the tank commander, played by Donald Sutherland, named Oddball, and he is a sergeant. This character is ahead of his time, or a little bit. The beatniks weren't a big thing until the 50s, but he is on the leading edge of the beatniks, which would later become the hippies. So, and they're playing Middle Eastern music and hanging out and just chilling and not in the war. But of course, they will risk it all for $16 million as well, with him and his 3 Sherman tanks, and they get out there. And this guy, he's overly flamboyant. He's the only one wearing a mustache and a beard, which is not regulation back then, but somehow he gets away with that as well. Everything is just off the wall, and he's crazy. He's like, there's one of my favorite lines from him. He's like, woof, woof, woof. That's my other dog impression. It's just out of nowhere, And Donald Sutherland is so great at playing. He's great at playing a lot of different parts, but he's very good at playing a guy who is just off the beaten path and doing his own thing, and you think he's just a tiny bit nuts. And there's 3 characters that always come to mind when I think of that. He plays Oddball in this movie. He plays a private, I can't remember the private's name, in The Dirty Dozen, and then he plays the teacher in Animal House. So really, really great. But he can also bring it straight. You think Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You also think of his role in Outbreak, where he plays a general officer, where he's the bad guy, basically. So very, very talented actor. And Oddball is the one. It's strange because it is something that was in the Army at this time. There was this growing movement. It's like, Kilroy was here, and this sense of, I'm not going to say nihilism, but the sense of pragmatism about, if I die or I live, I'm just going to enjoy it and have positive vibes type thing, because they had to get through the war. And so they're showing this element of these people who would come back in the 50s and would birth, this whole movement with the baby boomers, and it eventually would turn into free love in the 60s. And all of this started out of, a bohemian movement that was birthed from being over in Europe for 2 world wars, the second being World War II. So, that's putting a lot on this character, but the way he presents it is so fun. And then his chief mechanic, I'll throw these guys together, is Moriarty, played by Gavin MacLeod, who would
Captain
end up
Steuben.
being, yep, Mary Tyler Moore, and then he would be Captain Stubing in the Love Boat. So yeah, and Gavin McLeod is fantastic in this movie as well. So I love these characters. What do you think about Moriarty and Oddball? Great names, by the way.
Yeah, and they completely contrast each other. You can definitely tell, like, they expect Moriarty to be the more serious one, the one who's actually doing the work fixing. And here, Oddball is like, I don't fix nothing, man. I just drive it, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's just, the man is just, he's hilarious.
What are you doing? He's like, what are you doing? He's like, yeah, I'm drinking some wine, I'm eating some cheese, I'm catching some rays,
In the middle of a battlefield, like in the middle of a hot zone. He's just sitting back on a recliner, drinking it up and having girls around.
Yeah,
it's just great. I mean, this guy, he's definitely a man at a time. He looks like he absolutely belongs in the 60s, and you can definitely tell that the writers were very much into that kind of culture at that time. I mean, California and all that. But the one other thing is, I'm thinking that it was probably I wouldn't say an inspiration, but more a contribution, is the Lost Generation after World War One, because I would say like a lot of that mentality is definitely present in Oddball. Maybe not to that extent, but you definitely saw it with a lot of those writers that war definitely affected them, and and the nihilism and sort of like the anything goes sort of mentality kind of went from that. And so you have another war in the same vein with the same opponents. There a lot of that comes back. So I could kind of see where that comes from.
And I will say, true story, that Oddball influenced my decision to want to be in armor. And I wasn't an armor officer, but I was in an armor division, and that had a lot to do with Oddball. So yeah. So all right. Let's get to anyone else you want to go to? There's a few more.
I'll go with Crap Game for this one. Don Rickles is a hilarious guy, but I think people tend to underestimate how good of an actor he is.
Absolutely.
He brings it over here. And I would say, like, because the whole idea behind him is that he's a hustler, but he's not really in it to actually fight the war. He's just, in it to kind of take whatever he can out of it. He's constantly wheeling, dealing, like a lot of supply officers. I knew a guy who was a supply officer, and everything was about wheeling and dealing with whatever he had on supply to get other things. So that stuff went on.
That's what's really odd, is that it's like a trope. It's in all the movies, but it's kind of true.
So. Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, you had to survive and you had to get out ahead, and the people that were wheelers and dealers, managed to get out ahead with whatever stuff they had. And sometimes you had to do that to get the equipment you needed so that you could supply your unit. So it was a difficult job. But I think what's interesting is that he has an arc. And that is, this guy goes from being somebody who stayed far away from the line of duty and doesn't know anything about actually being in the field, to actually being a hardened, survivor and kind of, coming through the other side in one piece, because he's constantly complaining about having to tote this huge machine gun. And then it ends up being that, having the huge machine gun saved your life. Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah. I will close then with, first I have to get special mention to the guy who plays Mulligan. I think that's his name, Mulligan.
And that was a great name, by the way, because pulling a mulligan in golf is basically being a screw up, and this guy's a total screw up.
Yeah, and he's the artillery commander. And then I just looked. The general's name in the movie is General Colt. I mean, talk about American stereotype. But the last one I got to give a shout out to. I mean, there are quite a few of talented actors who play the other members of the platoon. But a couple stand out. One is Cowboy, but his sidekick is Willard, who's just a good old boy, and he's played by none other than our good friend of the show, as far as we love him and everything he's been in, Harry Dean Stanton. Just amazing. Absolutely fantastic. I don't know how early in his career this was, but I think it was pretty early. He looks really young, and he's great in this movie as it. And he has one very memorable line where he and Crap Game are taking cover from a bomb that's exploding, and it explodes a shit house and it pours down on them. And Crap Game gets the worst of it. He smells like crap, and he goes up to Cowboy, and Cowboy's like, "Woo, boy, you smell." And Crap Game, Don Rickles, being pure New York, goes, "What? Does it remind you of home?" Like that. And they go storming off, and Willard goes up to him, all good old boy. He's like, "Kind of does, doesn't it?" So, it's funny.
I'm wondering whether Rickles improvised that line. He's the kind of comedian who would be able to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that is his. I mean, they let Don Rickles be Don Rickles. For any of you who've never seen his stand-up comedy, or if you've never seen Don Rickles, go find some of his roasts immediately. Just prepare to be offended, because that's the whole point. So
yeah, he's also been on Twilight Zone. I think it Will the Real No, it wasn't The Real Martian. Mr. Dingle the Strong. He just goes messing around with Burgess Meredith. And some of that stuff, and it's not the best episode, but Rickles is fun in it. Yeah,
Don Rickles is good. I always get him confused, and I shouldn't, because they don't look anything alike. But Don Rickles and Don Lemon, so it's like, but very talented. And this was a guy who I think it's fair to say was on the back end of his career. So you've got people at different spots in their careers here, but he's really good at Crap Game because he's a fast talking New Yorker and can bring it and everything. But Harry Dean Stanton across from him, you can already see his talent, and you can see what he can bring, and he's just very good in this movie. And then the guy who played Cowboy, I don't even know, Jeff Morris. I don't think he had a big career, but he was really good playing with Harry Dean Stanton in this. So very cool. All right.
Yeah, there were a lot of duos in this movie that play off really well against each other. So that's another one.
So let's get into some of the themes of this movie. I think the first one that we have to tackle, and we've kind of tackled a little bit, is that this movie is very satirical and is poking fun at the army, military life. What is it like to be a soldier? It's poking fun of those old movies where every soldier is stoic, chewing on a butt and ready to die for his country, and everything like that. So what did you think of the way that, they did this movie, and they're looking at war from a completely different aspect?
There are movies where you can tell that these people either have served or spent time with people who did, because it definitely feels in many ways true to what I understand of the military. You've served a lot more than me. I haven't served, but I've been around a lot of people who have. And this is kind of why I can tell where things like Aliens is very true to the service. This is very similar. And you get to see like how these people just absolutely get it wrong, and a lot of times, you're in the middle of this war, and you're just having to do your best with what they give you, because oftentimes you're shot in the foot by your own side. And this happens constantly in the movie. Probably the most notable is when Kelly's group is kind of moving on their convoy, or stop for a while. And then what ends up happening is that this plane comes down and starts attacking them. And you start to wonder, okay, maybe this is a German plane. And then I saw the insignia. It was Air Force insignia. Yeah. I mean, having been around Air Force people a lot, I know that insignia. And I'm just like, oh no. And that's exactly what ends up happening. They end up losing like all of their vehicles, through like two strafes by one of their own planes, and they have to kind of make off and just kind of walk the rest of the way. And it's just like, yeah, this feels right. Like there's no communication, no coordination. You've got the artillery guy who's just constantly getting everything wrong, and Joe is constantly screaming at him, and it doesn't change anything because the guy is still an idiot. You got the general who has no clue. You've got the captain that is basically the second lieutenant with a map. I mean, Murphy's Law pretty much covers like a lot of these situations. Friendly fire isn't. Don't trust a second lieutenant with a map. All of that stuff that they actually put in that kind of things, and they make it work. It's at least from somebody somewhat on the outside, it seemed believable to me.
Yeah, it's. I can say from experience, it's not as bad as all that, but it can be. It feels like it at times. And I love one of the lines from Telly Savalas is like the only people that go out and volunteer for this crap are the hero types, and I don't see any heroes around here. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's a good way to get yourself killed. I will say Aliens also has another one of my top 5 favorite characters of all time, which is Hudson. Do a lot of people like that, like to complain, and then when push comes to shove, they step up. But unfortunately, Hudson buys it. But back to this movie. Yeah, I mean, everything that they're doing in here, feels real to soldiers. Soldiers like nothing else more to complain. Being a grunt is not glamorous, and everything else that goes in between. And so, even though this is a very, it's taken to a ridiculous level, obviously, there's a lot of valid stuff in there, and I enjoy seeing that, especially from a war movie. So, like, that's one of the things I appreciate, because everything you see before this from a World War II perspective, for the most part, is presenting it in almost going to say propaganda terms,
Yeah.
There are a couple exceptions. I don't know when this movie came out, but there's another one that I love that's a comedy called Operation Petticoat with Cary Grant.
Yes.
Yeah. So, there are some other movies like that out there, but they were few and far between. I don't know what year that movie came out, so it could have been before this one.
It was because Cary Grant would have been like towards the end of his career.
Yeah.
That sounds like early 60s, because the other person that was in there was Tony Curtis.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when he started hitting it big.
And he's young. It's a young Tony Curtis. So,
right.
Yeah. So, there's that all going on. Now, the second theme, and this is a little surprising. So we've talked about the funny parts of this movie and the satire. But there are some dark, not dark, but deep moments. One of them is one of the most trusted guys, and this is really a straight guy. I mean, this is a guy that Big Joe leans on, who is Corporal Job, played by Tom Trope. And once again, the names are great. He's a jobber. He's a dude that does his job every day. He doesn't have a whole lot of big parts, but he's competent. And they get stuck in a minefield after one of the people steps on a mine. And so two of them are stuck in the minefield, and they have to hang it out there and hope that they survive. And two more guys die, and everybody's kind of looking at them, and then they just move on and they keep going, and I think that's a very deep moment in the movie. It always touches me when I see that. I was wondering what you thought about that scene. So
I thought that was really well done, except for I felt like the others kind of had it a little easy, because that one area should have been better mined than it was. It's like, Kelly has no problems getting across. Most of these other guys have no problem getting across. They have plot armor. But you've got those two guys, and they're way over on the side. Oh no, there's a mine. No, I think that the Germans would have done a little bit better job of hiding their mines and spreading them around a bit. But other than that, no. The moment itself, I think, was very, very good. And yeah, I can understand why they were left behind, because it was right at that moment where the German convoy was coming up the road. They didn't have time to wait for those guys to get out. They did not have time at all. And unfortunately they were caught exposed out there. They had to find some way to survive, and they were just out in the open with no cover at all. They were sitting ducks. It happens.
All right, let's move on from there, because you brought up a good point, and we can always come back to other themes if you have another theme you want to talk about. But there are some inconsistencies in this movie. And so, I mean, we're watching this from a critical perspective. Don't get me wrong. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies, but I was watching it. One of them is this minefield. Like you said, it's a very sparsely populated minefield, for one. Two, navigating a minefield takes a long, long time. As someone who has had to do a mine course before, it takes a long time to go a very short way. And this was a long field. And so you get this sense that these Germans are not that far away. So either they were going at granny speed getting there, or we've got a time problem there. So what did you think about that first? I'm going to point out a few other inconsistencies.
Yeah. Normally troop movement is a lot slower than that, especially since they had armored vehicles in the back. Although I will say, Kelly's one rare tactical miscue is, why in the world are you shooting at the vehicles? You have no vehicles. They have vehicles. Why are you shooting up the enemy vehicles that you could have used?
Thank you.
That was a rare mistake on Kelly's part. But other than that, they screwed up with the mines. They in the placement of it. But it's still fun. It moves. You can definitely tell, time was sort of compressed and moved along, and they sort of cut certain things to make it seem quicker than it probably was to get out. So it may have taken them. It might have taken them a lot more time. They did spend a fair amount of time, going with the K-bars and the bayonets and
Right.
hitting there to make sure that there were no more other mines along the way. So they did spend a little bit of time there, but at the same time, they can't slow the pace of the movie to the point where all they're doing is, hitting the ground with K-bars.
Absolutely.
That would slow everything too much.
Now, the other one that kind of stood out for me, and I'm curious what you're going to think about this, the Tiger tanks. Now, the tanks look. Now, granted, I'm watching this in HD in 2024 versus in normal film in 1970. So I'm seeing details that probably didn't show up back then. The Tiger tanks, the shape looked fine. But when I was watching it today, I noticed that the armor looks like it's wood planks colored black. And I have this distinct feeling because the Tiger tank was probably, it's actually 3 that run, were probably pretty hard to get, and that you would get to be able to use on a set. I have a feeling these were some other form of armored vehicle that was changed by the prop people to look like a Tiger. But I was wondering if you noticed that at all or saw anything else inconsistent.
I didn't with that. I will say I know a little bit about Tigers, but it's really just from like reading Garth Ennis war comics, and Ennis tends to do his research on that stuff. The Tigers were really fearsome. That is historically accurate. I mean, they did have they had really good tank makers back then, and the Allies were taking a lot of time and money trying to catch up, and Shermans just were not up on that level. So that the fact that they had to catch them in the back or at a particular weak point, that made sense to me.
Absolutely.
So it's just, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the stuff that they used was very much constructed, or they had something and they built around it. That doesn't surprise me. It's not like, it's one of those things you kind of have to look for it though, so that's not too bad.
And I tend to notice it because I'm a little bit of a nut for military stuff and everything, but it doesn't take
away
more
experience in that stuff. So
I will say that Oddball was absolutely right. The front armor on a Tiger, there was no way in hell that a Sherman could penetrate it with its gun. So it just bounced off. In fact, if you want to see a great tank movie that is intense as hell and is pretty, is really realistic and kind of dark a little bit, watch the movie Fury with Brad Pitt. So great movie. Another movie I'd love to get to. I don't know how old it is, but that's about tank combat.
I want to say 10 years.
Yeah, good movie. Yeah, as far as other unrealistic, I mean, there are a few things, but it's not that big a deal. Now, the one thing I do want to say, let's go. And is there another theme that you want to talk about before we go to special effects on this movie? So,
yeah, no, let's kind of hold off on it right now.
Okay,
I'm just kind of blanking at the moment.
So this movie does not hold off on the special effects at all in the explosions. They bring it, and they bring it hard. For a movie that has a lot going on besides being a war movie, this is probably one of the best war movies ever made. So what do you think about that?
I absolutely definitely think that that's true. And even though it's definitely meant to be satirical to a certain extent, and it's a heist movie and all these other things, I think that it hits like the heart of what goes on in the battlefield. And I will say one other thing it mainly hits is also like it shows that these are actual people. These are not necessarily people that are heroes for a cause, because a lot of times soldiers are like made out to be these big heroes just for having served. That doesn't reflect the reality. It does, at least not in my experience. No. The people go into it for their own reasons, and sometimes they're just in it for themselves, or they're just trying to survive a thing they didn't ask for. And in this case, a lot of people didn't necessarily ask to be there. They just went out there because they for their own personal reasons, and you kind of see what's going on. Nobody's really invested in actually fighting the war, except when they have like a clear motivation to do so, which is, we want to get $16 million. So we're going to push our offensive into this village. We're going to liberate this village, and then liberate the gold. So, and it's really kind of interesting, and you see that among, Kelly's group when they're debating about this. Yeah. Why not go out and take the risk to get the gold? because it's like you're going to die anyway. You're going to die for nothing, probably. You're going to die making nothing. So why not, take the chance that maybe you might be one of the people to come back not only in one piece, but $16 million richer. I can't argue with that kind of logic. These were just people in a rough situation trying to make the best of a situation, and they get handed a dream opportunity. Why not take it?
Yeah.
And some of them don't make it back, but that's the risk, and they understood the risk.
And chances are between there and Berlin, some more of them are probably not going to make it back too. So
yeah.
But as far as the effects go, I mean, I watch it. The opening scene at the beginning where they're in Nancy and Clint Eastwood drives through. I mean, that's a little fantastic. But the shots at the beginning and the rain and the explosions and the mortar fire and the tanks coming through, and then later on, the various the artillery barrage to open up when they drive back through the town. Does it look like actual artillery? No. Does it look like movie artillery and it's effective? Hell yeah. It looks great. Same way for the firefights. I mean, there's a lot of really good squib work going on in this movie. So it's just a really, really top of the line war movie with practical effects all over the place that are just incredibly, incredibly well done.
And really good editing, I would say. A lot of it is editing, because you sort of see, you see basically people start firing their weapons, and then you kind of cut, to them falling down. So you're not actually seeing anything happening, but the editing is good enough and fast enough that it feels like all this is going on in real time.
Yeah. Or somebody's firing off a machine gun, and then they cut to the guy, and then they have the squib vest on that explodes out, but that, they're doing two separate cuts, versus, nowadays with the robotics and the remote control, they do more, ambitious shots where they have the shooter and the person getting shot are in the same shot, in the same screen, and then they just have somebody off screen detonate the squib after the guy pulls the trigger. But they didn't. I don't think they could have done that in 1970 or 1969 when the movie was made. So
not like
but overall the movie looks great. The vehicles are well maintained, all of them. A lot of them are authentic. They have authentic Jeeps, authentic half tracks. The uniforms look fantastic. Both the Allied uniforms and the German uniforms, they are period accurate. So they really did their homework on all of this and got it down correct. Even to the point that there is oh God, I'm going to try and speak the German. No, I'm not. A guy who's like a patrol leader, and he's wearing, right at the beginning, and he's wearing the metal, for lack of a better term, like shield around his neck type thing, which means he's like a squad leader type thing. I mean, that looked accurate. So it was really, really cool. I think they did a fantastic job in this movie with all of that. So
I would also add that you definitely can tell that these are sets that look lived in. Because you see in a lot of these, in a lot of the base areas, you see like little bits of Nazi stuff that they've taken as, littered in, and because that's all they've had. Like a lot of times they just get stuff that they use from the enemy and they use it as backdrop. There was that one scene in Crap Games office, I think it was, where you actually have like a Nazi flag being used in the background, just things like that. It's like, I mean, and you have, and also towards the end, you start seeing like the characters wearing jackets that were taken from the enemy. Like I know Oddball was taking like one of the leather jackets from somebody that he killed. You saw another guy wearing like an SS sort of jacket.
No, that's a trade for a tiger. So I'm like, I'm not sure what you're going to do with it, but okay. So
actually, that was kind of like funny. The whole thing, it's like all Oddball wants is to buy a tank. I'm like, I don't know what you would do with it after you have it, but okay, you want a tank, you got yourself a tank.
Not only that, how are you going to keep yourself from being shot when you have to eventually go back across, into your lines? But okay,
how much would it cost to transport the tank back, back home? I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing, what was I going to say? Oh, I just lost my train of thought. I don't know. Maybe it'll come back to me. No, I know what it is. The other thing that's interesting is that this movie, so I'm going to set the scene here for a moment. This is filmed in 1968 and 1969. We're at the height of the Cold War. This movie was filmed, the outdoor parts, in Yugoslavia.
Now that you mention it, 68, 69, I think I wouldn't be surprised if like some of this is meant to be a commentary on Vietnam, where similar things were going on.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, but I just found it very interesting that this movie was filmed in Yugoslavia, which is a Soviet republic at this point. So that was interesting to me that they got permission to film there and why they chose to film there. I don't know. I would love to know. I would love to talk to somebody to find out, but at this point, I couldn't find out why it was filmed there. But it's beautiful landscape, so it looks really cool. Let me think. Anything else that you want to cover before we wrap this thing up? I think so.
No, I think we've covered a lot of this thoroughly. I mean, it is a fun, feel good war movie, but at the same time, it definitely has that undertone of war is not what you think it is, and it is a bit of a subversion, and I think it really works in that vein. I think that the way that it's shot, the firefights, all of that is really good. It has that, and it weaves together a lot of different genres. It does so effectively. The characters are all fun. You got a lot of really great dynamics back and forth, and great duos back and forth, driving everything. And yeah, it's making fun of a lot of different things, but it is very much a movie of its time. And I just really kind of like the thought that they probably are talking about current wars, talking through a past war. And that is kind of a daring thing to do in 1968, 1969. So I kind of dig that.
Yeah. I also say that if I had to give this movie a tagline, so one of the most famous war movies about Vietnam was Platoon, that comes out, a little bit over a decade later. And the tagline for that movie is "War is Hell." I would say the tagline for this movie is "War is not heroic." That's probably the best way you can describe it. There's a lot of other things going on, but no one in this movie is depicted as a gung ho hero. So.
And I like that they chose the name specifically to kind of mock the idea of heroism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting now you point it out, because it's called Kelly's Heroes, and if the general had ever gotten a hold of them, they would have been hailed as heroes when that's the last thing they wanted to be. So that is interesting. So go check that out. Go check out Kelly's Heroes for sure. A very cool movie, very worth watching. Still enjoyable today. It holds up well. I will remind everyone, we did this a little bit out of order. I am going to be at a comic convention next weekend, so we are off on that Friday, but we will be back the weekend or the week after, and we will be doing Thief, and then Jeff will be picking a movie after that. So, but before we get out of here, I'm going to go to Steve. Final thoughts on Kelly's Heroes. Anything else you want to add before we get out?
Yeah, it's always nice to go back to a movie that I loved when I was younger and then realize that it not only does it still hold up, but there are elements to it that I didn't see or didn't remember seeing. And there are plenty of those in this. I just feel like the cast all delivers. The story is really, really good. It's not going to be, if you're looking for like a modern, sort of war movie, you're not going to find that here. It's definitely one of those that's kind of meant to be sort of fun and brisk. But at the same time, I think it says something about not only war, but about soldiers and about the idea of heroism. And it's definitely one of those that, if you're looking for something more meaningful in a war movie like this, I think you're going to find that. It's just really, really great.
Yeah. I would say I agree with everything you just said. I would say that this movie borders, it doesn't cross the line, but it borders on counterculture, making fun of war. It's like right there on the line. But it's not making fun of soldiers or anything they're doing. So it's enjoyable in that way. I think that this movie presents something that is plausible. I don't think it's probable, but it's plausible, So that's another thing going for it. And it's just a fun watch. I mean, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and it doesn't feel like it. It goes by really fast. And all of the various actors in here are absolutely fantastic, and you can enjoy them watching all of their performances. I mean, I can't really say that anybody in the movie is not good in it. Even smaller parts they're very, very good. So I really like this movie. I was very excited when you picked it. So cool. All right. So to all of you out there, like I said, we are off next Friday because I'm going to be off doing the comic convention thing. Look for some coverage of the convention. It's going to be up eventually on Comic Crusaders. I might have some good interviews for you as well. We will see what comes out of that. And then we will be back the following Friday with the movie Thief. For all of you out there, thank you so much for watching. Please click like and subscribe. Please try and follow us on Twitter, or on X. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear your feedback. And we just like to talk about comics and nerd culture and everything else. We're into that kind of stuff. We're nerds. We admit it. So I'm going to thank you so much, Steve, for being here to talk about this movie.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to watching this one and talking about this one. It's just one of those kind of movies that I wish I could talk about more. But it is what it is, and I think that it's been kind of nice to revisit. One of those movies I enjoyed, like in my teens, coming back to it.
Absolutely. Always, like I said, it's a classic and one that I go back and watch every so often. But I have it stored digitally on a permanent basis, and I also have a physical copy of it as well. So I love this movie. Thank you to all of you who were watching, and remember, this weekend, make sure you keep that popcorn warm. Find yourself a cozy chair, snuggle up in it, struggle with the cat in your lap like I'm doing right now, and watch some cinema. And until the next time we meet you, this has been Cinema Crusaders. We're out of here, everybody. Bye-bye.